The moment Clarissa Monroe stepped onto Flight 3196, bound from Charlotte to Emerald Bay, she carried with her a sense of superiority far greater than her first-class boarding pass. What she didn't anticipate was that her entitlement would collide mid-air with something far stronger, justice in the form of FBI Special Agent Nathaniel Brooks, whose 12-year-old daughter, Maya, was about to remind everyone on board that decency has no altitude limit. Some moments don't wait for heroes. They create them. And this one chose a middle school girl with a quiet strength that would stir an entire cabin. Outside, the August heat shimmered across the runway at Carolina Regional Airport as Nathaniel guided Maya through the bustling terminal. At 44, Nathaniel moved with the quiet precision of someone who had spent over 20 years in federal law enforcement. His tailored navy jacket remained sharp despite the southern humidity, and his trained eyes never stopped scanning, more instinct now than habit, even on what was supposed to be a personal weekend away. "Dad, you promised. No secret agent mode on this trip," Maya teased, adjusting the straps of her teal backpack as they neared the boarding gate. At 12, Maya had inherited her father's sharp perception. She noticed everything, especially the way his eyes ticked from person to person like he was mentally cataloging the crowd. Nathaniel smiled, ruffling her curly hair. "I know, sweetheart, but asking me not to be observant is like asking you not to read every sign we pass." Maya rolled her eyes but laughed. Her love of reading was well known in their home. She had packed 3 books for the 5-hour flight to visit her grandmother, Elaine Brooks, in Emerald Bay, a trip they had taken every summer since Maya's mother passed away 3 years earlier. "Grandma said she's making lemon pound cake tonight," Maya said, her eyes lighting up at the thought. Elaine Brooks' lemon pound cake was legendary across 3 coastal counties. Maya had been dreaming of it for weeks. "That's worth the trip right there," Nathaniel replied as they entered the line for priority boarding. His FBI badge allowed for the occasional travel perk, though he rarely mentioned his job unless absolutely necessary. Today was about family, not duty. Behind them in line, Clarissa Monroe tapped impatiently on her phone. Her acrylic nails clicked sharply as she complained loudly into her Bluetooth headset about the heat, the wait, and how appalling it was to stand in line like some average tourist. At 59, Clarissa considered herself part of Southern royalty, courtesy of her late husband's commercial real estate fortune and her status on a handful of charity boards, roles she secured more with money than merit. "I don't care what the system says, Harold," she snapped into her phone. "I paid for a window seat in first class. Make it happen. I will not sit by the aisle like some intern." She ended the call without waiting for a reply and immediately began assessing the people around her with the critical eye of someone used to social ranking. Her gaze fell on Nathaniel and Maya, her face tightening ever so slightly. Nathaniel felt it, like a chill brushing the back of his neck, but chose to ignore it. Today was about his daughter. They had been planning this trip for months. A full 2 weeks of hikes through Tranquil Pines National Preserve, afternoons at the Bayview Science Museum, and sweet ocean breezes after enduring the sweltering Carolina summer. When their boarding group was called, Nathaniel gave Maya a quick smile and guided her to the gate. She was mid-sentence about the deep-sea exhibit she hoped to see when they stepped onto the jet bridge. Their seats, 14A and 14B, were easy to find. Maya eagerly took the window, as always, while Nathaniel settled into the middle seat, placing himself between his daughter and the aisle with a quiet protectiveness that had only grown deeper since his wife's death. "All yours, kiddo," he said as Maya pulled out her current novel with practiced ease. "Thanks, Dad," she murmured, already flipping to her bookmarked page as Nathaniel stowed their bags in the overhead bin. The plane filled steadily, a line of weary travelers shuffling toward their seats. Nathaniel had just buckled in when a voice from the front of the cabin drew his attention. It was unmistakable. "Excuse me, excuse me." Clarissa Monroe's voice cut through the low hum of boarding chatter. She was speaking sharply to a flight attendant whose name tag read Kendra. The young woman smiled politely, despite the tension building between them. "There must be some mistake," Clarissa insisted. "I was promised a window seat in first class." "I'm sorry, ma'am," Kendra replied, her tone professional but firm. "Your boarding pass shows seat 3C, which is an aisle, and unfortunately the flight is fully booked today." Clarissa's face flushed with disbelief. "Unacceptable. I spoke to my travel agent personally. I need that window seat. I can't sit in the aisle for 5 hours." Nathaniel watched discreetly, his trained senses noting the signs: entitlement, denial, and a rising determination to make herself someone else's problem. "I can't sit in an aisle seat for 5 hours. I need to see out the window," Clarissa Monroe insisted, her voice grating with frustration. From their seats in row 14, Nathaniel Brooks quietly observed the exchange while pretending to help Maya organize her things. He recognized the tone in Clarissa's voice instantly. He'd encountered it more times than he could count during his career. People who genuinely believed that rules applied to everyone but them. "Perhaps one of the other first-class passengers might be willing to switch with you," said Kendra, the flight attendant, with a diplomatic but doubtful tone. It was clear she didn't expect volunteers. Clarissa sniffed dismissively. "Well, find someone. I'm not sitting in the aisle." Borden continued as Clarissa made her way through first class, trying to persuade passengers to give up their seats. Judging by the looks on their faces, she wasn't having much success. Eventually, she returned to her assigned seat, her frustration barely concealed. She shot daggers at Kendra, blaming her for not making the world bend to her demands. For a moment, it seemed the storm had passed. The last of the passengers boarded, the cabin doors were sealed, and the safety demonstration began. Maya was deeply absorbed in her book, barely noticing as the aircraft backed away from the gate and taxied toward takeoff. Then, just as the plane approached the runway, movement in the aisle drew Nathaniel's attention. Clarissa Monroe had left her seat in first class, ignoring the flight attendant's instructions to remain buckled. She marched into the main cabin, her eyes scanning the rows until they locked on Maya at the window in row 14. Her expression sharpened with resolve as she approached. "Excuse me," she said, addressing Nathaniel but clearly targeting Maya with her gaze. "I need to switch seats with your daughter." Nathaniel looked up, his tone calm but firm. "I'm sorry, but we specifically chose these seats in advance." Clarissa pressed her lips into a thin line. "I understand, but I have a medical condition that requires me to sit by a window. Surely your daughter doesn't need the window seat?" Maya looked up, confused by the sudden presence of a stranger towering over her. "Actually," Nathaniel replied steadily, "my daughter suffers from motion sickness. That's why we always book her a window seat." It wasn't entirely true. Maya had only gotten sick once, on a rough flight 2 years ago, but Nathaniel wasn't about to uproot her comfort for the sake of this entitled stranger. Clarissa's face hardened. "I'm sure she'll survive one flight in a different seat. I, on the other hand, have claustrophobia and severe anxiety. I need the window." By now, Kendra had reached them again. Ma'am, we're preparing for takeoff. You need to return to your assigned seat immediately. I'm trying to address a medical accommodation, Clarissa snapped. This child doesn't need the window. I do. Nathaniel stayed calm, though he felt a familiar wave of protectiveness stir inside him. He didn't like how easily Clarissa dismissed his daughter's well-being. I'm sorry about your condition, he said evenly, but we're not switching seats. Perhaps the crew can help you find another solution. Kendra hesitated, then asked, Sir, is there any chance you'd consider accommodating this passenger? Before Nathaniel could respond, Clarissa cut in again, her voice sharper, more caustic. This is absurd. I paid good money for first class and a proper seat. I shouldn't have to sit in discomfort because you want to spoil your daughter. Nathaniel froze. Her eyes flicked again, first to Maya's face, then to his, and something in her expression shifted. That calculating pause, that subtle narrowing of the eyes. He'd seen it before, the moment people realized Maya, with her warm brown skin and sharp eyes, wasn't adopted, that she was his daughter. The fury that sparked in his chest wasn't loud, but it was cold, focused, dangerous. My daughter and I will be keeping our assigned seats, Nathaniel said firmly. The flight attendant has already asked you to return to yours. Clarissa's face flushed deep red. I don't think you understand. I can't sit in the aisle. I have a medical need for that window. If that's the case, Nathaniel replied coolly, you should have arranged accommodations through the airline ahead of time. I did, she shouted, drawing more attention from nearby passengers. But clearly they don't care about customer service anymore, and neither do you, apparently. The plane had now come to a full stop on the runway. Whispers rippled through the cabin. Passengers leaned into the aisle, craning their necks to catch what was going on. Ma'am, Kendra said again, her voice tight with urgency. You are delaying this flight. If you don't return to your seat, we'll have to notify the captain. But Clarissa ignored her, doubling down on Maya instead. Young lady, she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, wouldn't you like to do something helpful? I'm sure your father would be proud of you for showing a little consideration. Maya looked up slowly, her brown eyes calm, unwavering. I'm sorry you're uncomfortable, ma'am, she said quietly, but I get sick without a window seat. Oh, please, Clarissa scoffed. That's clearly not true. You're just being selfish. Nathaniel had kept his patience until now. That last remark? It crossed a line. He straightened in his seat, his voice shifting, no longer fatherly but unmistakably authoritative. That's enough, he said, his voice low and commanding. You will not speak to my daughter like that. Go back to your seat. Now. An ugly shadow flashed across Clarissa Monroe's face. Her voice rose, brittle with rage. I don't know who you think you are, she snapped at Nathaniel Brooks, but I'm not going anywhere until I get the seat I deserve, and I don't appreciate your tone. From the aisle, Kendra, the flight attendant, stepped forward, her calm beginning to crack under the weight of the confrontation. Ma'am, she said sharply, you are delaying the departure of this aircraft and ignoring direct instructions from the crew. That is a serious violation of federal aviation regulations. I need you to return to your seat immediately. Clarissa planted her feet. I will not, she shouted, her voice loud enough to make heads turn throughout the cabin. This is ridiculous. I paid a premium for this flight, and I expect appropriate accommodations. Then she turned her gaze back to Maya, her tone dripping with disdain. I'm sure there are plenty of seats further back where she'd be more comfortable, she said, her voice laced with something unmistakable. The words landed like a slap in the air, sharp, ugly, undeniable. There was a collective intake of breath. A few passengers gasped audibly. Maya's eyes widened in shock and pain. The book in her lap slipped from her fingers. Nathaniel felt a cold, precise fury settle in his chest. He had spent years protecting his daughter from moments like this, carefully choosing when to shield her and when to confront the world's ugliness. But this? This was beyond casual ignorance or unintended offense. This was a deliberate insult, and Maya knew it. He could see it in her expression, the dawning realization that this wasn't just about a seat. It was about her, about what this woman thought she deserved, and what she believed Maya did not. Nathaniel moved slowly, deliberately. Without a word, he reached into the inside pocket of his blazer and withdrew his credentials wallet. With practiced calm, he flipped it open, revealing his badge and identification. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of authority forged from 2 decades in federal service. "Ma'am," he said, locking eyes with Clarissa, "I'm Special Agent Nathaniel Brooks, Federal Bureau of Investigation. What you just said to my daughter could be considered both harassment and a violation of her civil rights." Clarissa blinked, caught off guard. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came. Nathaniel continued, his tone steady but unforgiving. "Furthermore, your refusal to follow crew instructions and your disruption of this flight constitute interference with a flight operation, a federal offense punishable by up to 20 years in prison." Clarissa stood frozen, all color draining from her face. Her mouth opened again, this time with the panicked flutter of someone who had just realized they had crossed a line they couldn't walk back from. Kendra seized the moment. "Ma'am, please return to your assigned seat. Now." Without another word, Clarissa turned and shuffled back up the aisle, her head down, her posture crumpled. She didn't look at anyone. The confrontation dissolved under the sudden pressure of truth, of law, of consequences. As the plane finally rolled forward and began its takeoff, Nathaniel turned to Maya. Concern softened his expression. "You okay, sweetheart?" Maya nodded, but her eyes still held traces of confusion and hurt. "Why did she say that about the back of the plane?" she asked, her voice small. Nathaniel let out a sigh, deep and weary. "Some people carry hate inside them," he said gently. "It's not about you, Maya. It never is. It's about what's broken in them." She looked down, processing his words. "Is that why you showed her your badge? Because of what she said to me?" "Partly," Nathaniel admitted, "but also because she was interfering with flight operations, and that's something I couldn't ignore. But I want you to know something. You didn't do anything wrong. You handled it with more grace than most adults ever could." Maya reached for his hand and gave it a small squeeze. "I'm glad you're my dad," she whispered. He squeezed back, his throat tight. The plane rose through the clouds, climbing into open skies. Neither of them noticed the silent ripple that had begun moving through the cabin. Passengers whispered to each other, trading details of what they'd just witnessed. Some had seen it all. Others had only caught the final exchange. But the message spread. A child had been targeted, and her father had stood up, not just as a parent, but as a symbol of what justice looks like in action. The incident might have ended there, just another ugly moment in a world too full of them. But Flight 3196 had more stories to tell. 2 rows behind, Dr. Evelyn Chan gently set down the medical journal she'd been trying to read. At 36, she was returning to Emerald Bay after a 3-day pediatric surgery conference in Charlotte. Her mind had been filled with cutting-edge techniques and promising new research. but the scene she had just witnessed had cut through her thoughts like a scalpel. As a Chinese-American woman working in a male-dominated field, Evelyn was no stranger to being underestimated. She had faced enough subtle slights and overt dismissals to recognize the sting in Maya's eyes. It reminded her of moments from her own childhood in Maple Creek, Ohio, growing up as the daughter of immigrants, always having to prove she belonged. Seeing Maya's face, brave, confused, determined, sparked something deep inside her. When the seatbelt light blinked off, Evelyn closed her journal, unbuckled her belt, and stood. She didn't hesitate. With quiet purpose, she walked down the aisle toward row 14. "Excuse me," she said softly. Nathaniel looked up, instinctively assessing her. Maya looked up too, her expression still guarded. "I'm Dr. Evelyn Chan," she said, focusing her words on Maya. "I just wanted to say, what happened earlier was not okay, and the way you handled it, that was incredibly brave." Maya gave a small, surprised smile. "Thank you." Nathaniel's eyes narrowed slightly, more curious than defensive. "You're a physician?" Evelyn nodded. "Pediatric heart surgeon, UCS Emerald Medical Center." "That's impressive," he said, relaxing a little. Maya perked up. "We're going to the Science Museum in Emerald Bay. There's an exhibit about the human heart. I want to see it first." Evelyn smiled. "It's one of my favorite places in the city. They do a wonderful job explaining heart anatomy, especially for young scientists like you." Nathaniel offered his hand. Nathaniel Brooks. "This is my daughter Maya." "A pleasure," Evelyn replied, shaking his hand warmly. "If you ever want a quick behind-the-scenes peek at the hospital's children's wing while you're in town, I'd be happy to show you around." "That sounds amazing." Maya beamed. As Evelyn returned to her seat, she felt lighter than she had in days. The sterile world of operating rooms and surgical outcomes often left little space for emotional connection. But in that moment, on that flight, she had seen something real, something human, and she had felt compelled to be part of it. Back in their seats, Maya settled in beside her father again. The turbulence had passed, but the impact remained, etched in the quiet strength of a child and the measured response of a man who had mastered the balance between protector and professional. And somewhere in the front of the plane, Clarissa Monroe sat in silence, no longer the loudest voice in the cabin, but instead the loneliest. The soft sound of someone clearing their throat made Nathaniel Brooks glance up. Dr. Evelyn Chan stood beside row 14, her expression kind but purposeful. "Excuse me," she said gently. Both Nathaniel and Maya looked up, a little surprised. "I'm Dr. Evelyn Chan," she began, addressing Maya directly. "I happened to overhear what happened earlier, and I just wanted to say that woman's behavior was completely unacceptable. But you handled yourself with such incredible dignity." Maya gave a shy, appreciative smile. "Thank you." Nathaniel tilted his head, noting her introduction. "Are you a medical doctor?" he asked curiously. Evelyn nodded. "Yes, pediatric cardiac surgeon. I work at Emerald Bay Children's Medical Center." "That's amazing," Maya said, her eyes immediately bright with curiosity. "We're going to the Ocean View Science Center this week. They have an exhibit all about the human heart." Evelyn smiled, clearly charmed by the girl's enthusiasm. "That's one of my favorites. They've done a brilliant job making anatomy exciting and easy to understand, especially for bright minds like yours." Nathaniel extended his hand. "I'm Nathaniel Brooks, and this is my daughter, Maya." "Nice to meet you both." "Officially," Evelyn replied, shaking his hand with warmth. And thank you for the invitation, but I'm on call starting tomorrow morning. Maybe another time." With that, she returned to her seat a few rows back, but she found herself smiling more than she had in days. Something about Maya's resilience and Nathaniel's quiet, unwavering strength had struck a chord in her. In a world where she so often faced the worst outcomes of human fragility in her operating room, it was unexpectedly heartening to witness this kind of courage. Simple, strong, and deeply personal. Meanwhile, up in first class, Clarissa Monroe sat rigidly in her seat. Her posture was stiff, her eyes fixed on nothing in particular. The humiliation still burned on her cheeks as she replayed the confrontation over and over in her mind. The moment Nathaniel had revealed his FBI badge, the gravity in his voice when he had mentioned federal charges. She hadn't expected that. She had assumed, wrongly, she realized, that he was someone she could push around, that he and his daughter were somehow beneath her. The realization had hit her harder than she cared to admit. The other first-class passengers had heard the whispers. Some had overheard more than that. Clarissa could feel their judgment, even as they carefully avoided meeting her eyes. When Kendra, the flight attendant, approached with the drinks cart, her tone remained professional, but there was no warmth in her smile. "Can I get you something to drink, ma'am?" Clarissa nodded stiffly. "Vodka tonic, double." Kendra moved away to prepare the drink, and Clarissa became aware of the man seated beside her. He had a composed, refined air. Early 60s, silver hair, navy blazer. His clothes were elegant in a way that spoke of old money and quiet power. He glanced at her, his tone casual but his gaze sharp. "Rough start to the flight?" Clarissa bristled. "Just a misunderstanding," she said defensively. He didn't reply at first. Then, with a slight smile, he said, "Name's Graham Whitaker, by the way." Clarissa answered automatically. "Clarissa Monroe." "First time being called out by a federal agent for harassment?" he asked, his tone still polite, but with an edge beneath it. Clarissa stiffened. "I don't know what you heard, but I simply requested a seat adjustment for medical reasons." That man completely overreacted. Graham raised a skeptical eyebrow. "That's all it was? Because from what I gathered from the crew, you also made some unsavory comments to a young girl." Her grip tightened on the armrest. "People are so sensitive these days. You can't say anything without offending someone." "Interest in perspective," Graham said mildly. "Though, in my experience, when people say that, what they really mean is, I'm upset that I can't be openly bigoted without consequences anymore." Clarissa turned to him, outrage flaring across her face. "How dare you? You don't know anything about me." "True," he said calmly, "but I know what it looks like when someone believes their own comfort matters more than another person's dignity. I used to see it all the time." Clarissa frowned. "See it where exactly?" Graham's smile thinned. "I spent 27 years on the federal bench. Retired now, but I was a district court judge back in Massachusetts." Clarissa's face paled slightly. She had unwittingly placed herself between a federal agent and a retired judge. The irony stung. Kendra returned and placed the drink on Clarissa's tray with a courteous nod. "Here you are, ma'am, and just to inform you, the captain would like a word with you once we reach cruising altitude." Clarissa gave a curt nod and took a long sip of the drink, letting the burn of the alcohol mask the tightness in her throat. The flight hadn't even been in the air for half an hour, and already it felt like the worst kind of nightmare, one of her own making. Back in the main cabin, Maya had returned to her book, though Nathaniel noticed she kept rereading the same paragraph, her thoughts clearly adrift. He understood. No matter how much he tried to protect her, the world sometimes found its way in. "Hey," he said gently, nudging her shoulder. "Want to watch a movie instead? Might be easier to focus." Maya looked up, grateful. "Can we watch Hidden Figures again?" Nathaniel smiled. It was no accident that Maya's favorite film told the story of brilliant black women defying the odds and racism to change the course of history. Absolutely. They settled in with shared earbuds and a downloaded copy of the film on his tablet. As the familiar opening credits rolled, neither noticed the man seated across the aisle from them watching with quiet interest. From across the aisle, Julian West, age 48, watched Nathaniel Brooks and his daughter with growing interest. A journalism professor at Coastal Bay University, Julian was on his way home to Emerald Bay after presenting at a media ethics conference in Charlotte. He had witnessed the entire confrontation from start to finish. What struck him wasn't just the blatant prejudice, it was the quiet dignity with which Nathaniel and Maya had carried themselves in the face of it. That kind of calm, unwavering presence wasn't common in Julian's line of work. He had spent the first part of his career chasing headlines as a field reporter, covering protests, civil unrest, and stories of injustice from the front lines. Later, as a professor, he had shifted toward teaching others how to recognize and document the subtle, ongoing battles people faced every day. And something about this incident had gripped him. Maybe it was because it had unfolded in such a confined, inescapable space, on a plane 30,000 feet in the air, where no one could walk away. Everyone had become a silent witness, willingly or not. And now, they carried pieces of that moment with them. Julian made a mental note to speak with Nathaniel before the flight ended. Not to report the incident as breaking news, but because it represented something bigger. The day-to-day courage of parents like Nathaniel, raising children in a world that sometimes refused to recognize their worth, and the resilience of kids like Maya, who held their heads high even when adults failed them. The cabin gradually relaxed. The initial tension had begun to ebb, though an invisible thread still ran beneath the surface, connecting passengers who had been strangers just hours earlier. Some slept, others worked on laptops, many had turned to the in-flight entertainment. But what had happened in the row 14 wasn't forgotten. It had carved out a quiet space in the collective awareness of everyone on board. Up in first class, the situation continued to shift. Captain Thomas Vega, the seasoned pilot of Flight 3196, had indeed requested to speak with Clarissa Monroe. The request came quietly, but carried weight. He met her in the front galley, his voice low and firm. "Ms. Monroe," he began, "I've been fully briefed on the incident during boarding. Let me be absolutely clear. Discriminatory behavior or language on my aircraft is not tolerated. Period." Clarissa attempted to defend herself, her tone sliding into feigned confusion. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. I only asked for a seat swap. That man just overreacted." But Captain Vega wasn't moved. "The safety and dignity of every passenger is my responsibility," he said. "If there are any further incidents, you'll be restrained for the remainder of the flight and met by federal authorities upon landing. Do I make myself clear?" Clarissa gave a tight nod. Her words stuck somewhere behind clenched teeth. She returned to her seat, her face hot with embarrassment, her pride fractured even further. Graham Whitaker, the retired federal judge, watched her return with the analytical calm of someone who had presided over decades of uncomfortable truths. "Tough conversation?" he asked mildly. Clarissa ignored him, shutting her eyes and pretending to sleep. But her thoughts churned. The image of Nathaniel's badge flashed again in her mind. The firm set of his jaw, the absolute confidence in his voice. She hadn't expected that. Not from him, not from someone like them. She'd assumed he was someone she could dismiss, someone whose discomfort didn't matter. Now she understood how wrong she'd been. Worse than the confrontation itself was how the other passengers had looked at her afterward. Not with fear, not with sympathy, with clarity, as though something hidden had been exposed, something ugly that she hadn't realized was visible. Back in row 14, the movie had continued to play, but Maya's mind was elsewhere. A bout of turbulence jolted the plane slightly, sending drinks sloshing in their cups and causing some passengers to grip their armrests. Maya looked up, startled. "Was that bad?" she whispered. Nathaniel gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. "Just a little rough air, sweetheart. Nothing to worry about." She nodded, but her expression lingered on something deeper. After a moment, she asked, "Dad, that lady, she didn't really care if I got sick, did she?" Nathaniel was silent for a beat. His first instinct was to shield her, to soften the truth, but he had always promised to be honest with her, even when it hurt. "No," he said quietly, "I don't think she did." "Because of how I look?" Nathaniel felt his chest tighten. At 12, Maya understood what racism was, but feeling it firsthand was something no parent could prepare their child for. "Yes," he answered gently. "Some people judge others based on skin color. It says nothing about you, Maya, and everything about them." She sat with that for a moment, processing. Then she asked, "Is that why you became an FBI agent? To stop people like her?" Nathaniel smiled faintly, sadness flickering in his eyes. "The Bureau investigates a lot of things, not just discrimination. But yes, part of why I do this job is because I want to help make the world more fair, more just." Maya nodded thoughtfully, like Grandma. Nathaniel's heart warmed. He thought of his mother, Eleanor Brooks, a former civil rights attorney who had marched with Dr. King, argued landmark cases, and spent a lifetime speaking truth to power. "Exactly like Grandma," he said. "Fighting for what's right runs in the family." Maya sat up straighter, a quiet resolve building inside her. "I think I want to be a judge," she said suddenly. "Then I could make sure the rules are fair, and that people are kind." Nathaniel laughed softly, pride flickering in his eyes. "That's a beautiful goal, kiddo. You'd make a great judge." "I think I want to make a rule," Maya said suddenly, her voice clear and firm despite its youth. "A rule that everyone has to be kind. No exceptions." Nathaniel Brooks chuckled, touched by the purity of her declaration. "If only laws worked like that," he said, wrapping an arm around her small shoulders. "But I get what you mean. And whatever you grow up to be, Maya, I know you're going to make the world better." From her seat, 2 rows behind them, Dr. Evelyn Chan observed the exchange. Something about the bond between father and daughter stirred a deep tenderness in her. The way Nathaniel spoke to Maya, not just as a child but as someone with thoughts that mattered, was rare. And the way Maya looked at him, with complete trust, made Evelyn think of her own father. Her father had worked 16-hour days in their family's Chinese restaurant in Maple Creek, scrubbing pans long into the night just to send Evelyn and her 2 sisters to college. He hadn't known how to pronounce pediatric cardiothoracic surgery, but he'd never once doubted that Evelyn could become one. His belief in her had carried her through med school and into the OR. Seeing Nathaniel encourage Maya with that same quiet strength, it brought it all back. Across the aisle in row 17, Julian West was still scribbling notes in his journal. As a journalist, he had covered hurricanes, courtrooms, and war zones. But this moment, a young girl's resolve to respond to prejudice with dignity, felt just as profound. He was struck not just by the incident itself, but by the ripple it caused. The way one person's cruelty had exposed others' courage. The way a father's calm resistance had sparked something in the hearts of total strangers. This wasn't just a case of in-flight drama. It was something deeper, a pattern, a reminder that justice sometimes lived in the small, untelevised moments, the kind that reshaped people quietly. As the cabin began meal service, the flight attendants moved down the aisle with trays of boxed meals and drinks. When Kendra, the lead attendant, reached row 14, she paused a beat longer than usual. "How are you two doing?" she asked softly. Nathaniel gave her a grateful smile. "We're all right. Thank you." Kendra glanced at Maya, then lowered her voice slightly. "I just wanted you to know. What happened earlier doesn't reflect our airline's values. I've included it in my report. We take things like that seriously." Nathaniel's smile deepened with sincerity. "I appreciate that." As Kendra moved on, Maya watched her thoughtfully. "She's really nice," she murmured. "She is," Nathaniel agreed. "And you'll find that most people are, Maya. What happened earlier? That's the exception, not the rule." Maya looked down, considering his words. Her face, too serious for a 12-year-old, slowly brightened again with her natural spark. "So, when we get to Grandma's, can we get ice cream?" Nathaniel laughed, the tension finally easing from his shoulders. "I think that can be arranged." The plane continued cruising through the sky, and the passengers gradually settled into the familiar rhythm of long-distance travel. Conversations softened, screens lit up, trays opened. Peace, at last, seemed to settle over the cabin. But it didn't last long. About an hour later, just as the plane passed over Colorado airspace, a soft ding chimed overhead, and Captain Vega's voice came through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're experiencing a mechanical issue that requires us to make a precautionary landing in Denver. Please remain calm and follow all crew instructions. We'll be on the ground in about 20 minutes. A ripple of concern spread through the cabin. Heads turned. Fingers tightened around armrests. Nathaniel's instincts kicked in instantly. His eyes flicked to the window, then to the emergency exit rows, noting passenger reactions. No smoke, no strange sounds, no sudden descent. That was good. "Are we going to crash?" Maya asked, her voice small and scared. "No, sweetheart," Nathaniel said firmly. "This is just a precaution. Pilots are trained to land at the slightest sign of an issue. Think of it like when I take the car to the mechanic because the check engine light turns on. Better safe than sorry." Maya visibly calmed at her father's steady tone. Elsewhere in the cabin, passengers showed varying degrees of anxiety. Some clutched their seats, others whispered nervously to neighbors. Dr. Chan remained calm, her training preparing her for moments exactly like this. Julian West, meanwhile, was watching everyone, mentally filing away observations, the way a shared crisis could strip people down to their truest selves. In first class, Clarissa Monroe gripped the sides of her seat with white-knuckled tension. Gone was the smugness, the sharp tongue. In its place was naked fear. "What's going on? Why are we landing?" she demanded. One of the attendants leaned in, answering with practiced calm. "Just a precautionary landing, ma'am. The captain wants to have the plane checked out. There's no emergency." Clarissa still looked pale, but next to her, Graham Whitaker remained composed. Statistically speaking, he offered, "You're still safer on this flight than you were in the Uber that brought you to the airport." Clarissa shot him a look that could cut glass, but she said nothing. Fear had silenced her. As the descent began, flight attendants hurried through the cabin, checking seat belts and tray tables. Kendra stopped once again at row 14. "Everything okay here?" she asked, her eyes flicking to Maya with concern. Nathaniel nodded, one arm securely around his daughter. "We're fine. Do you know what the issue is?" Kendra's voice dropped. "Something to do with one of the hydraulic systems. Nothing critical, but the captain doesn't take risks." "Smart man," Nathaniel replied. His respect for Captain Vega had only grown. Outside the window, the city lights of Denver twinkled into view below, the snow-dusted Rockies forming a jagged frame beyond the skyline. And while the plane descended into the unknown, Nathaniel held Maya just a little closer, because this day, this flight, had already changed more than just their destination. The landing, when it came, was smooth and steady, a quiet testament to Captain Thomas Vega's expertise. As the plane taxied toward the gate at Denver International Airport, his voice returned over the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've landed safely. Our maintenance team will be inspecting the aircraft, which may take up to 3 hours. You're welcome to deplane and wait inside the terminal. Please keep your boarding passes with you and stay near the gate for updates. We apologize for the inconvenience and thank you for your patience." A chorus of groans rippled through the cabin, but there was also a shared sense of relief. The problem wasn't more serious. As passengers began collecting their belongings, Nathaniel Brooks turned to Maya, who was already zipping up her backpack. "Looks like we've got a few hours to explore Denver. How about we grab some lunch?" Maya brightened immediately. "Can we look for green chili? Remember how Aunt Sophia says Colorado green chili is legendary?" Nathaniel grinned at his daughter's adventurous spirit. "We can certainly try." As they made their way toward the front of the plane, they had no choice but to pass through first class. Clarissa Monroe remained in her seat, rigid and silent. When her eyes landed on Nathaniel and Maya, she quickly looked away, shrinking into the shadows of her discomfort like someone trying to become invisible. Outside the plane, the terminal was alive with movement, voices echoing off high ceilings, departure boards blinking with updates, and the buzz of 1,000 separate journeys. Nathaniel and Maya found a casual restaurant near their gate that boasted a taste of Colorado menu. The promise of authentic green chili caught Maya's eye instantly. They had just settled into a booth when Dr. Evelyn Chan entered, scanning the space with a slightly lost expression. Nathaniel noticed her and raised a hand in greeting. Evelyn spotted him and smiled in recognition, making her way over. "Mind if I join you? Dining solo in airports is a special kind of lonely." "Please," Nathaniel said, gesturing to the seat beside Maya. "We'd love the company." Evelyn slid into the booth, placing her carry-on at her feet. So, an unexpected Denver detour. At least the landing was smooth. "Very smooth," Nathaniel agreed. "Captain knows his stuff." "I'm trying the green chili," Maya declared with cheerful determination. "My aunt says it's the best thing about this state." Evelyn chuckled. "I've heard that too. Mind if I join you on that culinary quest?" "Absolutely not," Maya said, already flipping through the menu. As they placed their orders, the conversation turned from food to life. Nathaniel asked, "So what brought you to Charlotte?" "Medical conference," Evelyn replied. "I was presenting research on a new surgical technique for treating congenital heart defects in infants. Less invasive, quicker recovery." She shrugged modestly, as though saving babies' lives were a regular Tuesday. Maya's eyes widened. "That sounds really important." Evelyn's expression softened. "It is. Stripped of all the medical jargon, it's just about giving children a better chance." Their conversation flowed easily after that. They discussed Evelyn's work, Nathaniel's less classified FBI experiences, and Maya's growing passion for marine biology. By the time their food arrived, it felt like they'd known each other for much longer than a few hours. The green chili, as promised, did not disappoint. Maya gave it a theatrical thumbs up, and both adults gave appreciative nods between bites. From a table nearby, Julian West, the journalism professor who had observed much of the confrontation, sat alone with a steaming plate and a well-worn notebook. His eyes briefly met Nathaniel's. He gave a respectful nod before returning to his notes. "Dad," Maya said suddenly, her voice quieter. "That lady from the plane. She's here." Nathaniel followed her gaze across the room. Sure enough, Clarissa Monroe had entered the restaurant. Her movements were hesitant, her face still pale from either the emergency landing or the realization that her actions had been seen and judged. She hadn't noticed them yet, her eyes scanning for an empty table in the crowded space. Evelyn caught the shift in energy at their table. "Is that her? The woman from earlier?" Nathaniel nodded, his jaw tightening slightly. "Yes." "What exactly happened?" Evelyn asked softly. "I only caught the last part." Before Nathaniel could respond, Maya answered, her voice calm but steady. "She wanted my window seat and got mad when we said no. Then she said I should sit in the back of the plane." Evelyn's expression darkened with immediate understanding. "I see." By now, Clarissa had spotted them. Her steps faltered. Recognition bloomed on her face, followed by a fresh wave of embarrassment. For a second, she stood frozen, torn between fleeing and pretending she didn't see them. Eventually, she chose a table at the far end of the restaurant, facing away from them. Nathaniel didn't move. He stayed present, rooted, not to confront her, but to make it clear he would not be made invisible. Not today, not ever. Evelyn looked at Maya, then back to Nathaniel. "You both handled that with more grace than I think I could have managed." Nathaniel gave a small, appreciative nod. It wasn't easy, but Maya shouldn't have to carry someone else's ugliness. As they returned to their meal, the air at the table began to lighten again. The tension faded, not forgotten, but softened by good food and stronger connections. And, though they were far from their original destination, the detour to Denver had given them something unexpected: shared strength, unexpected company, and the beginnings of something deeper than a fleeting moment. "Should we leave?" Maya asked softly, glancing toward the woman across the restaurant who had caused them so much pain just hours earlier. "Absolutely not," Nathaniel Brooks said firmly. "We have every right to be here, and to enjoy our meal." Dr. Evelyn Chan smiled lightly, adding, "Besides, your green chili looks too good to abandon." Maya giggled, the tension loosening slightly at Evelyn's gentle humor. They all turned back to their conversation, deliberately ignoring Clarissa Monroe's presence across the room. Nathaniel watched Maya with quiet pride. Her ability to bounce back, to reclaim her peace so soon after such an unsettling encounter, was nothing short of remarkable. It reminded him of her mother, Sophia, who had faced her illness with the same steady grace. Cancer had stolen Sophia's body, but not her light, and that light now flickered in Maya. As they finished their meals, a shadow fell across the table. Nathaniel looked up to see a familiar figure approaching. Graham Whitaker, the distinguished gentleman from first class, stood beside their booth. In person, his Boston accent was more distinct. "Pardon the interruption," he said. "I'm Graham Whitaker. I was seated next to Ms. Monroe, and I couldn't help overhearing what transpired on the flight." Nathaniel nodded politely, though cautiously. He wasn't sure where this conversation was headed. "Nathaniel Brooks," he said. "Dr. Evelyn Chan," Evelyn offered with a nod. "I'm Maya," Maya added, her curiosity openly studying the older man. Graham's stern features softened as he looked at her. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Maya. I wanted to say, what you experienced today was unacceptable, and I'm sorry." "You don't have to apologize," Nathaniel said gently. "You weren't the one who said it." "In a way, I was," Graham said. "When we witness injustice and stay silent, we become complicit. I've spent most of my life upholding the law, but I've learned laws don't change hearts. People do." He turned again to Maya. "I was a federal judge for almost 30 years, and I can tell you, your composure today would have impressed any courtroom in the country." Maya blushed, ducking her head with a shy smile. "Thank you, sir." Graham hesitated, then continued. "I had a rather enlightening conversation with Ms. Monroe during the flight, and again just now. She's asked me to pass along her apology." Nathaniel's eyebrows lifted slightly. "Did she?" Graham gave a wry smile. "Well, what she actually said was that she may have overreacted and meant no offense. I took the liberty of translating that into an actual apology." Evelyn laughed softly. "That's generous translation work, Your Honor." "Years of interpreting legalese will do that," Graham replied with a twinkle in his eye. He grew more serious. "The truth is, people like Ms. Monroe rarely change overnight, but sometimes a moment like this can plant a seed. What happens after is up to her." Nathaniel nodded thoughtfully. "You've seen both the worst and best of people, I'm guessing." "I have," Graham said, "and while I'm no idealist, I've come to believe that redemption, however messy or slow, is possible. If we stop trying to change minds, we surrender the world to those unwilling to grow." Just then, an announcement echoed through the terminal speakers. "Attention passengers of Flight 3196 to Emerald Bay. Aircraft maintenance is now complete. We will begin boarding in 30 minutes at Gate A42. Graham straightened his posture. "Well, it seems our unexpected Denver chapter is drawing to a close. It was a pleasure meeting you all. I hope we can continue this conversation once we're back in the air." With a parting nod, he turned and walked back toward the gate area. Nathaniel watched him go, his mind swirling with the unlikely constellation of people who had emerged around that flight. The soft-spoken doctor, the sharp-eyed journalist, and now the seasoned judge. Connections forged not just by chance, but by choice in the face of something ugly. "Ready to head back to the gate?" he asked Maya, who was polishing off the last of her green chili with great enthusiasm. She wiped her mouth with her napkin and grinned. "That was so good. I can't wait to tell Aunt Sophia she was totally right." They gathered their things and rose from the table. As they stepped into the steady flow of terminal traffic, Evelyn glanced toward Nathaniel. "Would you mind if I walked back with you?" Nathaniel smiled. "We'd be glad for your company." The three of them moved through the terminal together. Maya bouncing alongside them as she chattered about all the exhibits she hoped to see at the Ocean View Science Center once they arrived in Emerald Bay. Nathaniel found himself relaxing more with every step. For the first time since boarding the flight that morning, the tension in his shoulders was gone. He wasn't just enduring the day anymore, he was moving through it. When they reached gate A42, clusters of passengers had already gathered. Some stood around chatting, others browsed nearby kiosks or sipped coffee from paper cups. Nathaniel spotted Graham Whitaker again, this time in deep conversation with Julian West, the journalist who'd been taking notes throughout the flight. Julian's notebook was open in front of him, and he was writing as Graham spoke with his usual measured calm. A few seats away, Clarissa Monroe sat alone, encircled by designer luggage. Her posture was closed off, her eyes fixed on her phone. She didn't look up as they passed. The invisible wall she had built around herself seemed now to trap her more than protect her. And as the three of them waited for boarding to begin again, Nathaniel knew the rest of the flight would carry more than just passengers. It would carry the weight of what had been said, what had been heard, and what might still come of it. From the jet bridge, Captain Thomas Vega and his first officer stepped into the gate area, their presence immediately drawing the attention of the waiting passengers. Captain Vega moved with steady assurance to the gate agent, who handed him the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "thank you again for your patience during our unexpected stop. The maintenance team has successfully resolved the hydraulic issue. We're cleared to continue to Emerald Bay, and while we'll arrive about 3 hours behind schedule, I can assure you the rest of the flight will be smooth and uneventful." A quiet murmur of relief passed through the crowd. No one enjoyed delays. But when stacked against the possibility of in-air danger, a few hours felt like a small price to pay. As boarding resumed, Nathaniel Brooks noticed Graham Whitaker had finished his discussion with Julian West, the journalist with the ever-present notebook. But instead of heading to the boarding line, Graham was now walking toward Clarissa Monroe. "What's that about?" Dr. Evelyn Chan asked, following Nathaniel's gaze. "I'm not sure," Nathaniel replied, his attention now focused on the quiet but pointed exchange taking place between the judge and the woman who had once demanded Maya be moved to the back of the plane. At first, Clarissa's body language was defensive, arms crossed, chin raised. But as Graham spoke, something shifted in her posture. A deep exhale, a subtle softening of the shoulders, reluctance mingled with resignation. A few minutes later, their own boarding group was called. Nathaniel, Maya, and Evelyn presented their passes and made their way down the jet bridge. As they walked, Evelyn turned to Nathaniel. "Would it be okay if I switch with someone to sit near you two? I've enjoyed our conversations." Before Nathaniel could respond, Maya beamed. That would be great. Back on board, it turned out the passenger in the aisle seat of their row was happy to switch when Evelyn explained she was a doctor and wanted to stay close to the family. Soon they were settled again. Maya by the window, Nathaniel in the middle, and Evelyn on the aisle. The plane filled quickly, boarding proceeding more efficiently this time. Nathaniel was just helping Maya tuck her books into the seat pocket when a hush fell over the front of the cabin. He looked up. To his surprise, Clarissa Monroe was walking down the aisle, accompanied by Graham Whitaker. Murmurs spread through the cabin. The same woman who had drawn so much attention before now seemed utterly transformed, not in appearance but in demeanor. Her steps were unsure, her face tight with effort. When she reached their row, Clarissa paused. Her gaze remained somewhere over Nathaniel's shoulder, but her voice was directed at him. "Excuse me," she said stiffly. I wanted to apologize for my behavior earlier. It was inappropriate." Every word seemed to cost her. Nathaniel didn't miss the subtle nod Graham gave from behind her, a clear indication of support and perhaps gentle insistence. He recognized this wasn't an apology born of enlightenment, but of accountability. Still, even the effort held weight. Before Nathaniel could respond, Maya looked up from her seat. "Thank you for saying sorry," she said simply, her voice gentle but firm. Clarissa's eyes finally met Maya's. For a second, something in her expression shifted. Conflict, perhaps, or recognition. "You're welcome," she said. The words sounded strange in her mouth, as if they hadn't been spoken in a long time. Graham cleared his throat softly. "Ms. Monroe has also agreed to make a donation to the National Civil Rights Museum in Memphis," he added. His tone was diplomatic but firm, hinting this wasn't a suggestion. It was part of a quiet agreement. Clarissa gave a small, stiff nod. "Yes, I have." Nathaniel understood the significance. It wasn't redemption, but it was something. A step, a seed. "I appreciate that," he said, his tone even. "Thank you." With a quick nod, Clarissa turned and made her way back toward the first-class cabin. Her posture remained rigid, but there was a difference in the way she moved, as though she had set down a weight she hadn't even realized she'd been carrying. Graham lingered a moment longer. "She'll be thinking about this day for a long time," he said quietly. "Sometimes that's how change begins." As the older man returned to his seat, Evelyn leaned toward Nathaniel. "Did that really just happen?" "Apparently so," Nathaniel replied, still processing the moment. "The judge is impressive," Evelyn said. "I wonder what he said to convince her." "Whatever it was," Nathaniel mused, "I'd bet it was equal parts legal pressure and moral clarity. Hard to ignore a man who's lived both." Maya, who had been quiet through the exchange, now spoke again. "Do you think she's really sorry, Dad?" Nathaniel paused, then gave the question the honesty it deserved. "I think she's sorry she got called out publicly. Whether she's sorry for the right reasons? That might take longer. But Judge Whitaker's right. This could be the beginning of something, even if she doesn't realize it yet." The rest of the flight unfolded without further incident. As the plane climbed back into the sky, the Rockies unfolded beneath them, majestic, snow-dusted, and sprawling. Passengers leaned toward the windows, marveling at the view, their shared experience in Denver already becoming part of the collective memory of the journey. At their row, conversation resumed easily between Nathaniel, Evelyn, and Maya. They talked about Evelyn's most memorable surgeries, Nathaniel's strangest FBI assignments he could talk about, and Maya's dreams of studying ocean ecosystems. There was laughter, curiosity, connection, and above it all, a quiet peace. Fragile, but real. Their conversation had taken on a relaxed rhythm. Comfortable, warm, filled with curiosity and humor. It was hard to believe they'd only met hours earlier. "You know, Dr. Evelyn Chan said during a lull, I host a dinner once a month at my place in Emerald Bay for my colleagues at North Coast Medical Center. Nothing fancy, just food and conversation. If you two are still in town this Sunday, you'd be welcome to join us." Nathaniel Brooks raised an eyebrow, surprised and clearly pleased. "That's very kind. We'd enjoy that, wouldn't we, Maya?" Maya nodded with enthusiasm. "Will there be other doctors there? I have questions about marine mammal medicine for my school project." Evelyn laughed, her eyes lighting up. "I can definitely invite my friend Dr. Patel. She works with the Coastal Mammal Center in Saucil Point and would absolutely love to talk your ear off about sea lions." They exchanged contact information, and as Nathaniel typed Evelyn's number into his phone, he felt something unexpected. Hope. What had begun as a simple family trip to visit his mother had turned into something far more layered. Connections born from conflict, forged in the quiet moments afterward. As the plane began its descent into Emerald Bay, the late afternoon sun cast the city in golden light. Through the window, Maya caught her first glimpse of the Golden Horizon Bridge, and her face lit up like it always did. No matter how many times she'd visited, the view never lost its magic. "There's Grandma's neighborhood," she said, pointing eagerly. Her hand tapped the glass as she traced the outline of the Sunrise District, where Eleanor Brooks had lived for over 40 years, in the same blue-painted Victorian where Nathaniel himself had grown up. The plane touched down to a round of spontaneous applause from the passengers, a tradition that felt particularly earned after an afternoon of mechanical delays and social turbulence. As they taxied toward the gate, Captain Vega's voice returned over the intercom. "Thank you once again for your patience and cooperation during our brief stop in Denver. It's passengers like you that make our jobs easier, even on the unpredictable days." Nathaniel scanned the rows ahead and noticed Julian West still writing in his notebook. The journalist had observed nearly every moment: Clarissa Monroe's entitled outburst, the quiet strength of Maya, and even her reluctant apology. When they deplaned, Nathaniel was surprised to see both Julian and Graham Whitaker waiting just inside the terminal. The two men appeared deep in conversation, though they paused when they spotted Nathaniel, Maya, and Evelyn approaching. "Agent Brooks," Julian said, stepping forward with purpose. "Julian West. I'm a professor at Coastal Bay University, formerly a field journalist. I was wondering if I might have a quick word with you." Nathaniel's posture stiffened slightly, a flicker of his professional instincts surfacing. "It's about what happened on our flight," Julian continued. "Not for the news. I don't work in that space anymore. But, as part of a long-form piece I'm writing on quiet acts of courage and their ripple effects." Graham stepped beside him, his steady presence lending the moment a calm gravity. "Mr. West shared his project with me. I find it compelling. I've agreed to offer my perspective." Nathaniel looked down at Maya, who stood between him and Evelyn, listening intently. "We're just here to visit family," he said carefully, "not to become a case study." Julian nodded, his voice respectful. "Of course. And if that's your decision, I understand. But what happened today, the way you both responded, even Ms. Monroe's eventual apology, it reflects something larger, a pattern, a moment worth understanding, shared on your terms and your timeline." Evelyn, who had been listening quietly, added, "I think there's value in telling these stories. In medicine, especially as a woman of color, I've found that when we speak up about these experiences, it gives others language and courage to face their own." Nathaniel looked at Maya again. "What do you think, sweetheart? It's your story, too." Maya thought for a moment. If it might help other kids who go through something like that, maybe we should. Pride swelled in Nathaniel's chest. She was so much like her mother, turning pain into purpose, never shrinking away from what mattered. "All right, Mr. West," Nathaniel said, "we can talk, after we visit my mother, and I'll need to review anything before it's published." Julian smiled. "Absolutely. And please, call me Julian." They exchanged contact information, and as Nathaniel tucked his phone back into his pocket, he realized something profound. This flight, with all its turbulence, both mechanical and human, had unexpectedly expanded his world. Not just geographically, but emotionally. Evelyn, with her grounded brilliance and warmth. Graham, with his moral clarity and quiet wisdom. Julian, with his journalist's eye for quiet transformation. And even Clarissa Monroe, with her halting apology, perhaps the start of a longer journey toward accountability. Together, they formed a strange constellation, brought together not by choice, but by a shared moment that asked each of them who they were, and who they wanted to be. Clarissa Monroe, whose prejudice had ignited a string of events none of them could have anticipated, may have just taken the first step, halting, reluctant, on a long journey of reflection. Whether she would follow through remained to be seen, but the seed, perhaps, had been planted. "Ready to see Grandma?" Nathaniel Brooks asked as he and Maya moved toward the escalator that would take them to baggage claim. "So ready," Maya said with a wide grin. "I can smell her peach cobbler already." As they said goodbye to Evelyn Chan, Graham Whitaker, and Julian West, each promising to reconnect during their time in Emerald Bay, Nathaniel reflected on just how different this trip had turned out. What should have been a straightforward flight had become something far more meaningful. A test of values, a confrontation with injustice, and the discovery of unexpected friendships. And maybe, just maybe, a spark of change for someone who had once seemed incapable of it. Father and daughter walked side by side through the terminal, their matching rolling suitcases clicking quietly over the tile floor. Around them, the airport buzzed with energy. People rushed to connections, embraced long-lost relatives, checked arrival screens, and clutched coffee cups. Thousands of stories were beginning, ending, or intersecting. But Nathaniel knew. Some connections, like the ones formed on Flight 3196, would endure long past the closing of cabin doors. At the arrivals area, a figure stood out in the crowd. Eleanor Brooks, silver-haired and upright as ever, waited with eyes bright beneath her glasses. At 75, she still carried herself with the commanding presence of someone who had once stood before the Supreme Court with steel in her spine and justice in her voice. "There they are," she called out, opening her arms wide. Maya rushed forward and flung herself into her grandmother's embrace. "Grandma, we had the craziest flight." As Maya launched into a passionate retelling of their journey, from the entitled woman in first class, to the unexpected landing in Denver, to the apology she hadn't expected but bravely accepted, Nathaniel watched his mother's face shift from joyful welcome to concern, to fierce pride. When Maya finished, Eleanor squeezed her granddaughter's hand. "Just like your mother," she said softly. Sophia never let anyone dim her light either. The mention of Sophia Brooks, gone now for 3 years, brought a gentle ache to Nathaniel's chest. It was a grief he had learned to live with, but never fully left behind. And yet, watching Maya stand tall in her truth, speak plainly of hard things and still smile after, it reminded him just how much of Sophia still lived on in their daughter. "And you," Eleanor said, turning to Nathaniel with a twinkle in her eye, "flashing your FBI badge like something out of a courtroom drama?" Nathaniel laughed. It felt appropriate at the time. "It always does," Eleanor replied dryly. "Now let's get you two home. That cobbler isn't going to eat itself." They made their way to the parking garage, Maya skipping ahead with youthful joy. As they walked, Nathaniel told his mother about the dinner invitation from Evelyn, the article idea from Julian, and the surprisingly sincere conversation with Judge Whitaker. Eleanor raised her eyebrows with interest. "Sounds like you made quite an impression." I guess we did. Well, it runs in the family, she said matter-of-factly. The Brooks name has been shaking rooms and shifting narratives since long before either of us was born. Nathaniel smiled, his thoughts drifting for a moment to his great-grandfather, one of the first black lawyers in Georgia. Then to his mother, whose legal battles had helped shape equal rights in the state, and finally to his own path in federal law enforcement. A legacy of justice earned not by reputation alone, but by action. A legacy he now passed on to Maya. As they reached Eleanor's car, she unlocked it with a tap. "So," she said casually, "tell me more about this doctor you met." "She sounds interesting." Nathaniel chuckled, instantly recognizing that tone. "Mom, it's not like that. We just met." "We'll see," she replied with playful ambiguity, as they drove through the golden-lit streets of Emerald Bay, passing cable cars, painted row houses, and the shimmering curve of the Pacific. Nathaniel found himself reflecting on the day one more time. A flight marred by prejudice, a father defending his child with calm strength, a young girl standing her ground, strangers who chose to speak up instead of staying silent, an apology that, while imperfect, still mattered, and, within it all, the possibility of something bigger, a ripple effect stretching further than any of them could measure. Flight 3196 had not simply carried them across miles. It had transported them through something far more difficult to navigate, the terrain of human dignity, pain, and compassion. Some journeys were about distance, others were about growth. As Eleanor's car wound through the Sunrise District, Maya rolled her window down and leaned into the breeze. The ocean's distant scent mingled with the aroma of late-afternoon bakeries and eucalyptus trees. Her face glowed with joy and curiosity, her eyes scanning the streets of the neighborhood she'd visited since she was small. "There's Grandma's street," she exclaimed. Nathaniel looked over at his daughter, her future unwritten, her heart already resilient, and felt a deep, grounding peace. Whatever lay ahead, today had proven something important. Courage can be quiet. Change can start with a single no. And the strength to do what's right often begins in the people we love. As they pulled into the driveway of the old Victorian house, the sun cast long shadows across the front steps. Inside, the promise of peach cobbler waited. But outside on the curb, Nathaniel paused just a moment longer. Because some flights don't just carry you forward, they change your direction, and sometimes they change who you're becoming.